Joe, quite a speech last night. The visuals were incredible. The speech itself was really trying to reach out to all Americans at the most perhaps divisive time in modern American history.
Well, and what matters the most to Donald Trump, crowd size. The crowd size was absolutely massive. I mean, I could not believe what I was looking at. It was just absolutely, I mean, the people just came flooding in support of Kamala Harris. And I will say, in contrast to what Donald Trump has said, I thought it was compelling. I loved the message last night, and she kept going back to it, Willie. She kept going back to how people that disagree with her are not the enemy. She doesn't want to put them in jail. She wants to put them around the table and listen to them. She kept talking about finding common ground. She kept talking about compromise. She kept talking about being the president of all Americans, even those Americans who vote against her. And what a marked contrast. There's so many distractions in this campaign. Other news channels will get distracted with people who are not running in this campaign. What matters is what the two people who are running in this campaign are saying. And what they're saying right now is this, that for Donald Trump, if you oppose him, you're an enemy of America. You're an enemy from within. You're going to get arrested. And what Kamala Harris is saying is, I'm going to bring America together. I'm going to compromise. I'm going to forge consensus. And if you would disagree with me, you won't be on my enemies list. You'll be at my table, and we'll be talking about how to bring America together. And just so people don't think this is just some vague generality, she went right there with border crossings, illegal border crossings, securing the southern border. And what did she say? I will work with Republicans like James Lankford to pass his bill, a compromise bill, a tough bill that would have secured the southern border immediately. Donald Trump, he killed that bill because it didn't make sense for him politically. Let's turn the page. Let's move to a new chapter. Let's work with those who may not agree with us all the time.
Yeah, it was. First of all, as Mika said, the visual was striking. That was the implicit message, was that we are here at the place on one of the darkest days in American history began, January 6, 2021, here with a massive crowd. As you said, Joe, the original permit was for 8,000 people. Then they moved it to 20,000 people. They say there might have been up to 75,000 people, not just in the scanned area for security, but outside that area as well, waving American flags, talking about freedom and setting up the contrast. And, you know, for as deeply as we've been covering this race for, gosh, almost 2 years now, many Americans, as you talk about all the time, Joe, tune in this last week, even in the last weekend, and they say, okay, I've heard a lot of noise. Let me dial in. Let me lock in. Let me listen to what I'm dealing with here. And they saw it on display last night. And Vice President Harris kind of led the crowd there on a journey from the American Revolution, talking about the petty tyrant that was King George III, how American freedom, the thirst for freedom overcame that, invoking Normandy, invoking Seneca Falls, invoking Stonewall, all the moments where Americans pushed and fought for freedom, and how we're at this point again. And she suggested that we will not, this country, go back to another petty tyrant, talking about Donald Trump there. Yeah. So the contrast could not have been clearer.
Oh, my gosh. I want to get to Katy and Mike, but before, let's hear a little bit more from Vice President Kamala Harris's major speech last night in Washington, D.C. She spoke to a crowd of, the number that we're looking at here is about 60,000 people. That's according to an NBC News estimate. For perspective, the House committee that investigated the January 6th attack estimated that 53,000 people attended Trump's speech there that day. The vice president's speech laid out the threats the former president poses to our democracy and the kind of president she would be.
Look, we know who Donald Trump is. He is the person who stood at this very spot nearly 4 years ago and sent an armed mob to the United States Capitol to overturn the will of the people in a free and fair election. An election that he knew he lost. Americans died as a result of that attack. 140 law enforcement officers were injured because of that attack. And while Donald Trump sat in the White House watching as the violence unfolded on television, he was told by his staff that the mob wanted to kill his own vice president. And Donald Trump responded with 2 words: "So what?" America, that's who Donald Trump is. And that's who is asking you to give him another 4 years in the Oval Office. For as long as I can remember, I have always had an instinct to protect. There's something about people being treated unfairly or overlooked that frankly just gets to me. I don't like it. It's what my mother instilled in me, a drive to hold accountable those who use their wealth or power to take advantage of other people. The drive to protect hardworking Americans who aren't always seen or heard and deserve a voice. And I will tell you that is the kind of president I will be. And look, I'll be honest with you, I'm not perfect. I make mistakes. But here's what I promise you. I will always listen to you, even if you don't vote for me. I will always tell you the truth, even if it is difficult to hear. I will work every day to build consensus and reach compromise to get things done. And if you give me the chance to fight on your behalf, there is nothing in the world that will stand in my way. On day 1, if elected, Donald Trump would walk into that office with an enemies list. When elected, I will walk in with a to-do list full of priorities of what I will get done for the American people. And I will work with everyone, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, to help Americans who are working hard and still struggling to get ahead. Nearly 250 years ago, America was born when we wrested freedom from a petty tyrant. Across the generations, Americans have preserved that freedom, expanded it, and in so doing, proved to the world that a government of, by, and for the people is strong and can endure. And those who came before us, the patriots at Normandy and Selma, Seneca Falls and Stonewall, on farmlands and factory floors, they did not struggle, sacrifice, and lay down their lives only to see us cede our fundamental freedoms. They didn't do that only to see us submit to the will of another petty tyrant.
You know, I've been told through the years since doing this work that people will come up and say, well, why can't politicians work together? Why can't they compromise? Why are they always campaigning and always taking one extreme side or the other? Why can't they follow the dream that America works best when we work together, that it's a government of the people, for the people, by the people, for the people? Jon Meacham, some words said last night, I wrote some of them down here, that we haven't heard from Donald Trump ever. Where she says, I'm not perfect, I make mistakes. By the way, that's not weakness, that's a political strength to be able to say that. I will always listen to you. I will always tell you the truth, even when it's hard. I will build consensus and I will compromise to get things done. And when I go into the White House on my first day, well, unlike Donald Trump, I will have a to-do list. Well, he will have an enemies list. And by the way, he's already told us that. But I think what's so compelling is we've talked about these people, old line Republicans that have been desperately trying to make excuses to vote for a guy who says he's going to be an autocrat. And sometimes they say, oh, she hasn't come to the middle enough. Oh, she hasn't done. Here was Kamala Harris last night saying, if you disagree with me, I'm not going to put you on an enemies list. I'm not going to insult you. I'm going to bring you in. You're going to have a seat at the table, and we're going to work together for compromise, for consensus, for the betterment of the American people. That doesn't sound like Donald Trump. In fact, it doesn't sound like a lot of politicians we've heard over the past 30 years.
No, President Kennedy referred to the office as the vital center of action. And one of the questions we always face is, what's going to be the action of the person that we put at the center of that arena? And that's not an ideological term. It's the nature of power, even in a democracy. Right? We're shaped by this transaction often between the leaders and the led. And we're only as good as we are. But we can be made a little better if you have a president who speaks the way and who's conducted herself in the way the vice president has. I thought the speech last night was fully part of an American vernacular where you can agree or disagree with this tax rate or that tax rate, but you know what you're getting. You're getting someone who will take the oath seriously. Mm-hmm. You're getting someone who actually sees, as she said, she's not perfect. No one's canonizing anybody here, but we know what we're getting. Right. And the question is, do you want a president you would recognize who's working in a tradition that at least goes back to Lincoln, maybe even Jackson? It's a Jackson, Lincoln, FDR, Kennedy, Reagan presidency. Or do you want to risk this on someone whose own appetites are self-evidently consuming? I know where I stand.
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes, and we are 6 days out from Election Day. It is shaping up to be one of the closest elections anyone has seen in U.S. history, certainly in the modern era of polling. We got a ton of polls nationally and the key 7 swing states basically all showing a dead heat between Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. If you watch this program, if you're someone in what we used to call the reality-based community, I think you understand that this is a very tight race in a closely divided country that genuinely could go either way. The story on the right is not that.
Joe, how's it going to end?
Landslide for Trump. Electorally, he wins every swing state.
They are throwing everything they can, as Donald Trump's early voting numbers are great, as his odds in the betting markets are ascendant.
It's over. Donald Trump's got this.
I don't see where the votes come from for Kamala Harris. She's not a good candidate, and the issues are on the side of Donald Trump. He wins this. He wins this quite easily. Save the tape. Play it back if I'm wrong.
The race is over, but the integrity of the election is still in question.
Now, this is just a sampling, and it comes from the top, but the story on the right has been for a while that Trump is cruising to victory, that he's way ahead, that the Harris campaign has collapsed, that the only way they can win is stealing it. That is not at all what the available data says, not what the polls are saying. It's just as untrue as it was 4 years ago. But it hasn't stopped Donald Trump from telling the same lies on the campaign trail this year.
They're going to cheat. They cheat. That's all they want to do is cheat. And when you see this, it's the only way they're going to win. And we can't let that happen. And we can't let it happen again. We're going to have no country. Are they cheating, Michael? They're trying, but are they? They're not going to get away with it, right? If we win and when we win, we're going to prosecute people that cheat on this election. And if we can, we'll go back to the last one, too.
Now, again, as far as we can tell, Donald Trump can very well just win this election outright in 6 days. He might. But as he's been telegraphing for 4 years, the plan, the definite plan, is to cheat and to sow doubt about the outcome in advance, so he can claim the election has been stolen, just like he did last time. In fact, yesterday, one of the ex-cons advising Donald Trump put on 3 shirts and gave a press conference after getting out of jail. Almost immediately, Steve Bannon said Trump's main mistake on election night in 2020 was that he took too long to falsely declare victory, a mistake he said Trump shouldn't make again this year.
President Trump came up at 2:30 in the morning and talked. He should have done it at 11 o'clock at night in 2020. Okay? I am urging President Trump, if the votes come in like it looks like they're going to come in, he should step up and inform the American citizens of exactly what's going on and not keep people in the dark like was done in 2020.
Okay, so this is all clear as day, right? We're all seeing this. They're doing it on camera into microphones. They're not like running around in the dark. They are running the same Stop the Steal playbook as they did 4 years ago when they lost an election by like 4.5 points. That would be, of course, the coup attempt that Trump and dozens of others are still facing prosecution for. In fact, this evening, a reporter asked Trump about his election night plans while the ex-president was dressed in a reflective vest climbing into his Trump-branded garbage truck.
Could you imagine any circumstances under which you would be defeated but not say that the election was stolen?
If it was a corrupt election, that could happen.
Do you anticipate to declare victory on election night?
I hope that we're going to declare a victory. I mean, they spend all that money on machines. It's like very sad when you get machines, you pay all that money, and they talk about 3 days later. I think we're going to have a big enough victory to maybe have it that night.
To the extent that you could make any kind of like coherent propositional content out of those statements, which is often a challenge, it's basically the same shtick, right? This time, the Republican central message is getting an enormous signal boost, not just from Fox, of course, where it is, but from the social media platform X and its owner, Elon Musk, the Trump-loving reactionary billionaire, the world's biggest broker of disinformation. That's just one place where Trump and his allies are now posting false claims about cheating at large-scale levels in Pennsylvania early voting. On Wednesday, it turned out there might be some voter fraud being committed, not in Pennsylvania, not by Democrats. In fact, on Tuesday, Indiana State Police said they had arrested a Republican precinct committeeman and former congressional candidate named Larry Savage. Police say he stole 2 ballots from a test of voting machines and then claimed the machines were flawed.
According to court documents, investigators also searched his phone and found a text that morning reading, "Sis, they say anything about the ballots I took?" Investigators also say he posted on a social media page condemning Madison County election procedures after taking those ballots. Police found the ballots in his truck later that day.
This is one of the worst things that can happen, given the national climate about integrity of elections, to intentionally steal ballots and then attack the system. I can't imagine a bigger disservice to our community than that.
Just to be clear, this genius went and stole ballots after a machine test and then posted about how like there was a miscount, and then they found the ballots in his truck. Okay. Meanwhile, as Republicans are setting the scene for, again, another attempt to overturn the election results, basically a declaration of victory independent of what the voters decide, what Democrats are left doing is the work of democracy, which is trying to win, right? To do what they did in 2020 and 2022, which is to get people who they have persuaded, who agree with them on the issues, to go out and vote and to win a close race. David Plouffe is a senior advisor for the Harris campaign, and he joins me now here in New York City. It's good to see you.
See you, Chris.
I feel like you've got much more important work since the last time that we spoke. we were sharing takes on cable news. Now exactly. you got a real job.
Yeah.
How are you feeling?
Good. It's going to be close, but we like what we're seeing in early vote. We like who the undecided voters are. I think we have momentum at the end. What they're doing right now is super puzzling. Doesn't betray any confidence, by the way, whatsoever. There are still undecided voters out there, and they don't like this stuff. And it's also, I think, not a great signal to send to your supporters that you think you've got it in the bag or it's stolen. We saw what happened in the Georgia Senate runoffs really hurt Republican turnout. So this is going to be super close. We're just sticking to our knitting here and trying to turn out every voter we can. But he's not closing a presidential race particularly well.
When we talk about close, I mean, people come up to me, and I'm sure in your life all the time, to the extent that you're not just change your desk, and it's like, they say, like I have some secret knowledge. What's going to happen? And I say, we just got the data we have, which is like a very close race. I want to just affirm this. You guys aren't sitting on some secret data. I mean, obviously more data than what we have publicly, but like from your view, it looks like what we're seeing.
A lot more data, as the Trump campaign.
Yeah.
And they're not acting like a campaign that's incredibly confident. Like this Pennsylvania temper tantrum is all about Trump, I'm sure, being briefed on early vote numbers, not liking them,
right,
and wanting to be able to declare at 11, as Steve Bannon said, he's going to win because he's likely going to be ahead in the count at that point. So we have a lot of data. But what it has shown us from the very beginning, when Kamala Harris entered this race, we were losing by quite a bit. We've been able to get that narrowed to basically a dead heat race everywhere. But, you know, listen, I think if we're going to be surprised on the upside on election night, it may be that we do even better with women voters than public polling and even our own data shows. That's the only surprise. What we're seeing is basically this thing's going to come down to 0.3, 0.4, 0.7, 1 point in all 7 states.
If that's the case, right, and there's not a big polling mess, because there could be. No one knows what the future, right? And it could be in either direction. Just want to be clear on this, right? What's most important in the next 6 days, like from your perspective?
Well, and I would say this, we're being enormously conservative in our own data around Trump, you know, saying, okay, he surprised us in 16 and 20, so let's make sure we are giving him the strongest performance.
Cushion, yes.
Okay. And I think a lot of public pollsters are doing that. So for us, we've got Kamala Harris, Tim Walz, surrogates all over the battlegrounds, reaching those few undecided voters that are left are important, trying to encourage people to vote early, to volunteer. And then the most important thing is on the ground, because in all these states, some are going to have well over 50% of the vote cast by the election day, some a third. So it's a more narrow list of people. And you say, I know Chris is voting for me, and he hasn't voted yet. I want to talk to him multiple times.
This is an important point I just want to make for folks that are thinking about the race, whatever their politics are, and I think you should vote whatever your politics are, that the early vote is good for campaigns if it's for them, right? For 2 reasons. One, you don't want to leave anything to chance, an enormous freak blizzard. But 2, to reiterate that point, you know who's voted early, you know who's left outstanding, and you've got a good sense of who your voters are. And if they're not, if they voted early, you've reduced the universe of get out the vote on election day.
And so the Republicans, you know, Trump's been somewhat inconsistent on this, but his campaign's been consistent. They want people to vote early.
Right.
So that's what's happening. I think people are looking, a lot more Republicans are voting than they did in 20. Yeah. Like, of course, that's what we anticipated. More Democrats are returning to voting on Election Day. So, yes, in every state now, we have a smaller pile than you would if no one voted early. So we can build an organization. I will say to anybody who's watching this who's anxious, go to KamalaHarris.com, your local organization. You can sign up for door-knocking shifts, phone shifts, texting shifts. There are people out there every day you hear from a volunteer says, I talked to somebody.
Yes.
They weren't sure they were going to vote. I think I persuaded them to vote. And our message is going to be clear. Super close race, massive stakes, every little bit of effort and every vote can make a difference.
3.3 million people have voted in North Carolina. The early vote there split evenly among Republicans, Democrats, and independents. Now, Harris was there today, as well as Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Trump in PA and Wisconsin, where we can see the numbers show about 989,000 people have voted, with the Democratic registered voters holding an edge. Harris hitting Pennsylvania late today, where another large crowd was in a festive mood, singing Hit the Road, Jack, getting ready to reject Trump on Tuesday. Harris giving a version of her stump speech, including what she calls the promise of America.
We love our country. And when you love something, you fight for it. And I do believe it is one of the highest forms of patriotism, an expression of our love of our country, to then fight for its ideals, to fight for the ideals of our country, and to fight for the promise of America.
The promise of America. That line there, building on the address she gave last night. is really as spare as it is fundamental. The promise of America. When you couple that with the address last night and how it called for a patriotism that defends democracy and actually prizes bipartisanship over an endless partisan war, these are the kind of things that, let's be clear, could be uttered by John McCain or Ronald Reagan in his statesman era, or Liz Cheney after Trump's coup drove her from that party of Reagan and Bush Cheney. It could have been uttered in a similar style by really any of the founding fathers. And as Rachel was reporting in MSNBC's special speech coverage last night, you might have seen the speech or some of the coverage, this was quite clearly Kamala Harris's most important speech of this campaign homestretch, perhaps Harris's most significant speech until the one she will give when she steps to the lectern when all the votes are in, to either concede or assume the presidency. So she stood at that MAGA crime scene to present not only a rebuke of what Trump did there after the votes famously showed his loss, but to go beyond criticism. Last night, she tried to embody what leadership actually entails. Remember, Trump asked people to come to that very spot on a date, January 6th, which had never before been a time to gather. We can remind you about 20,000 people came there. Many went to prison for what they did that day in Washington. Well, Harris summoned a far more peaceful and law-abiding crowd, but also a much larger crowd. You can see it here. You might have seen it in the coverage last night. It actually spanned 75,000 people. The contrast clear from substance to style. Her campaign arguing in this closing that America faces a choice between prosecutor and criminal, uniter versus divider, a stateswoman, a sitting vice president, versus an autocrat driven from office once. Fundamentally, her campaign argues it's a choice between the leader that America needs right now and a petty loser whose lies and grievances are only rivaled by his strange political resilience. So what you're about to hear right now as we begin our broadcast is the actual contrast between these two closing arguments.
No one takes her seriously. Everyone knows she is a very low IQ individual.
On day one, if elected, Donald Trump would walk into that office with an enemies list. When elected, I will walk in with a to-do list.
Kamala Harris is a radical left Marxist, rated even worse than crazy Bernie Sanders or Pocahontas. She destroyed our economy.
I pledge to seek common ground and common sense solutions to make your life better.
They are indeed the enemy from within, but this is who we're fighting.
Unlike Donald Trump, I don't believe people who disagree with me are the enemy. He wants to put them in jail. I'll give them a seat at the table.
Even that enemy, too, when they're really the enemy, they're the enemy of the people, the press. We had stupid generals like Milley and Mattis, weak, stupid people.
Nearly 250 years ago, America was born when we wrested freedom from a petty tyrant. Those who came before us, the patriots at Normandy and Selma, Seneca Falls and Stonewall, on farmlands and factory floors. They did not struggle, sacrifice, and lay down their lives only to see us cede our fundamental freedoms. They didn't do that only to see us submit to the will of another petty tyrant.
Those are the actual closing arguments of these two people. What do you want me to say? I mean, don't make me repeat lines, conclusions, sentences like that is as stark a contrast as you'll see in any election in your lifetime. Don't make me say if this were a movie, this closing contrast would be too obvious, too overdone. This is not a movie. It's true the politician openly threatening to steal the whole election and jail opponents as soon as he wins is a washed-up game show host. That is on the nose, but the stakes are too high. Or as one Politico manifesto from De La Soul put it, you know them stakes is high. Sick of liars and their sickening rap. Risking a whole sick world collapse, the facts are getting sicker. Even sicker, perhaps, to make you want to escape this whole synapse. Like, who wouldn't want to just escape processing all these realities through the neurons in our own brain? Because these realities are concerning, depressing, exhausting, if we're going to be honest about it. The point of that verse, though, is to reject the temptation to seek out lies or drugs to escape the unpleasant reality. For the reason you already know. The stakes are too damn high for that. So that's what elections are for. Our obligation is to face it and change it if we can.
I want to bring in NBC's Monica Alba at the White House. Eddie Glaude is a Princeton University professor and MSNBC political analyst. Jess O'Connell was CEO of the DNC and executive director of Emily's List. So, Jess, what of her closing argument do you think will work best in these closing 6 days as she hits those battleground states? What resonates?
Well, I think a number of things stood out last night. First of all, when you're within a week to Election Day, to this big moment that we've all been sort of lurching forwards to, I think it matters how we feel. And I think what happened last night and what Kamala Harris and her team pulled together last night in Washington, D.C. on the ellipse in such an important place that takes us back to where Donald Trump was on January 6th. What they did was the style and substance of that speech, the way she looked, the way it was framed, and what she talked about, her journey into this, her journey to this moment, the work that she intends to do, and how the difference is so stark, I think really is about the feels right now. We're really about inspiring and turning out the people that she needs to turn out and going after, as you said, a few of those persuadables, people that are still figuring out how they feel about this whole thing. Believe it or not, there still are some. And I think last night did nothing but help.
So she is on the stage right now, and we have a picture of that in Raleigh, North Carolina. And she just said, make no mistake, Eddie, we will win. Well, she didn't say Eddie. She said, make no mistake, we will win. But Eddie, this, I think, was bigger than a vision for policy, right? It was a vision for America at large, a kind of cultural shift. And I want to play specifically something she said that made me think about that.
America, for too long, we have been consumed with too much division, chaos, and mutual distrust. And it can be easy then to forget a simple truth. It doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way.
And I also thought she kind of redefined what it means to be a patriot. We're used to thinking of people who fought in wars. She mentioned Normandy as patriots, Eddie, but then she mentioned Selma and Seneca Falls and Stonewall. Do you think that this kind of broader, more cultural message can move people who are still worried about the economy or immigration?
I think it both and, because she did. First of all, it's great to see you, Chris.
You too.
She also said that, and then she transitioned to policy issues that will address those economic questions, right? Child care credit, right? The way in which she talked about the opportunity economy and broke it down in very detailed form. But I think it's really important for us to understand that that she's offering us a way of imagining ourselves differently, apart from the ugliness of the last decade or so. And that is up to us. You know, the freedom is not only freedom to choose, the freedom of the right over our own bodies, but freedom comes with it a responsibility. That's why we've said over and over again, following John Dewey and others, that democracy must be reimagined, must be defended every generation. And so she put that choice, that burden, that responsibility on us, but she did it with a kind of joy that was shall we say, compelling.
She put her foot to the pedal, that's for sure, and is keeping it there, Monica. 3 battleground states today. Tell us about that.
I think you can expect to hear this same message that was so carefully crafted for last night, amplified today to these specific audiences. And so you see her there speaking, and later when she heads to Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, she's going to be repeating some of these lines and these key ideas that emerged from those remarks last night, like turning the page on what she said and called and framed as Donald Trump's divisiveness and his division, trying to argue that she views Donald Trump as somebody who's obsessed with revenge and with seeking unchecked power, and she is going to say that that is not who she is, and certainly not who, in her words and her beliefs, what she thinks should be reflected in an American leader like the President of the United States. And you also have seen her really lean into something that she started to talk about a few days ago, and now she's really boiled down to this closing message, an argument, which is that she says if Donald Trump were to win, he will be going down a so-called enemies list, and that she is saying she has a to-do list for all the things that she wants to do. And last night you really did see these bipartisan overtures where she was trying to say that if Donald Trump is making that list of people that he views as his biggest critics and detractors, she's saying that even if there are people who disagree with her, she wants to invite them to her table to be a part of giving her real-time feedback and ideas, and to maybe be a part of her administration by appointing a Republican in the cabinet and to have this bipartisan council of advisors. So she's going to take what she really tried to project last night and now repeat it again in these different stops in the battlegrounds. And then, of course, Chris, as you know, there is a major message about just getting out the vote, making a plan to vote, taking advantage of early voting where it's possible and where it may be wrapping up soon. And that's the other main aim. And you see in trying to build these crowds, last night she had tens and tens of thousands of people here in Washington. They're still trying to make that a big priority in these battleground states in the closing days, to have big crowds, big turnout, and then again try to translate that into voters and supporters that they hope show up for her in terms of the campaign's ideal scenario on Tuesday, Chris.
Monica, thank you for that. You know, Jess, Trump always talks about MAGA as a movement, and he was thrilled on Sunday at Madison Square Garden, packed to the rafters. But then when you saw the size of Harris's crowd last night, larger than the crowd that Trump drew on January 6th, we might say, and it seemed like her campaign was messaging, this is a movement too. And I want to read what one woman told USA Today. I couldn't just sit on my couch. I am a black woman attorney. I'm a descendant of enslaved people. I am a history buff who knows my family's history. There's so many reasons why I came today to support her. I felt like I couldn't sit at home. And I wonder, as people watch this, can that be motivating itself in these final days, as if to say to them, you can be a part of this?
For sure. 100%. I mean, that is the message that she is closing with, that all of her surrogates are closing with, that the door is open, the table is here and set, and she is inviting people who agree with her, who disagree with her. She's galvanized more Republicans than anyone I've ever seen in my lifetime that's running for president. People who are not just supporting, but are out there campaigning for her. People like Liz Cheney and others. She is giving people a home that they felt they have not had. People who do not agree with Donald Trump's racism and the hate that he's been spewing for this past decade. They are looking for a home, and she is saying this can be it. And so she is engaging the traditional Democratic base. She's building a winning coalition, but she's inviting others who have been looking for a place for common sense, a place that can turn the page. And I think that the thing that she said in that speech that really landed is this promise of America. And we saw it visually in the crowd. We see it in the crowds around the country that are coming for her, which I'm sure is getting under Donald Trump's skin. But we also see it in the substance. These are issues that people have been talking about for a long time. And she's saying together we can solve them. We have to do this together. I think we're going to keep hearing that. And I think that as we get down to the wire and people are, again, going on feels, this sort of like game time decision here at the end, if they're not early voting, it's going to be about how they feel. And the more momentum this campaign shows towards the end, people want to be a part of this, and I think they will be.
It's almost like there's a shift, Eddie, because her campaign and Kamala Harris herself, didn't want to say for a long time anything but that We cannot take anything for granted. This is going to be an incredibly tight race. We're not going to say what the outcome is going to be. And now, today, saying we will win. And that sign that has the message she's had from the beginning. When we vote, we win. It does feel, when you hear the chants of the crowd, when you see the signs and the message repeated, that it does feel a bit more like a movement, and a successful one. That seems to be her message.
Well, it might not be a movement, but it's certainly a historical moment. A moment that calls each of us to take responsibility for democracy. What she did yesterday last night was so powerful. As a prosecutor, she didn't have a poster board with a timeline. She took the entire American public to the crime scene and reminded us that Donald Trump was an insurrectionist who threatened the very foundations of democracy. She told us very clearly the danger he presents, the dangers we face. And so the moment calls us, the historical moment calls us. And so what we saw was a tentativeness, right? We can't be too confident because she understood what happened in 2016. But as we move to November 5th, let's get that enthusiasm stoked. Let's get those feels right. And let's do what history calls us to do. And that is take responsibility for democracy and move into it and turn the page, as she says, turn the page.
Yeah. And the other thing, Eddie, is that, she was not afraid to say, I don't know everything. I'm not perfect. I'm going to bring in other people. I'm going to talk to people who don't agree with me, which in and of itself is such a huge contrast, right, to the way Donald Trump has been. But also, you recently wrote about your decision to vote for her, not because you see her as a cure for all of America's problems, but as a way, as you wrote it, buying time. Is it important to set expectations for voters as well as giving them hope?
Right. And so I was really writing that piece for myself and for my leftist and progressive friends. You don't have to view Kamala Harris as a savior. That's wrong. We don't have to see your vote for her as settling the question around the carceral state or ending the horrors in Gaza. But what we do know, and this is from James Baldwin, is that the context for our voting has to be understood strategically, Chris. And that part of the time, most of the time when we vote, we're voting to buy ourselves some time, as he put it, to watch so that the tide can turn, so that the tide may turn. And so in this moment, we know what a Donald Trump presidency will look like. What would it mean to organize and struggle for a more just world under Donald Trump? And what would it mean to organize and struggle for a more just world under Kamala Harris? I think the latter would be more conducive than the former.